Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year and welcome to the Georgia Gang. We're bringing you our top political stories of 2022 along with a look at what's ahead in the new year. Topping the list, as polls predicted, Georgia voters delivered a split ticket in the Senate and gubernatorial races. Also, the U.S. Supreme Court ruling on Roe v. Wade and its impact on Georgia, and violent crime in the city of Atlanta, along with the closing of Atlanta Medical Center. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Janelle are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
2022 is now in the books, and what a political history chapter that unfolded right here in Georgia. Let's start with Governor Brian Kemp, who easily defeated a challenge from one of the highest profile Democrats in the country, Stacey Abrams. Janelle, what message did this send to the rest of the country?
Well, I think that the biggest message it sent was that, solutions, policy agendas, policy positions matter way more than narratives, racial division, gender divides, and all the other stuff that was being pushed. I think that was the biggest message that was sent, that voters really care about people that's going to provide a level of solution. I saw that Brian Kemp, Governor Kemp, he definitely avoided a lot of the hot button issues. He didn't talk a lot about the 2020 elections or Trump or any of that stuff. He talked a lot about inflation, economy, education, and just issues that matter to a lot of people. And I think that's the biggest message that was sent to the country.
Theron, we talked a little bit about this last week, but we're getting a behind-the-scenes look at how the cash-strapped campaign of Stacey Abrams, and really how cash-strapped it was near the end. I mean, were you surprised at some of these numbers that we're hearing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot has come out since the last time we discussed this, and I think as you really dig deeper into this, there was a lot of money that was raised, but a lot of spending. And I think a lot of people are saying now, Lori, if you had said anything that will be a challenge for Stacey Abrams, fundraising would have not been one of them. And so clearly it was a campaign that had to make some tough decisions through the campaign, but I just didn't still like the fact that you had employees, people who actually were working directly on the campaign, and when the campaign was over, still was waiting to be paid. But ultimately, look, Democrats, we've got to learn from this, move on, and restore confidence to make sure that donors will believe in us.
Melita, let me ask you, where does Stacey Abrams go from here?
Well, she's 48 years old. She has many productive years ahead of her to continue making an impact. She's a proven fundraising and organizational powerhouse, and that leaves her room to continue to promote voting rights and voter registration. But she's also, on the creative side, a New York Times best-selling author across several genres. In fact, publishing a new children's book about books, by the way, since the election. And her best-selling novel, While Justice Sleeps, created a very compelling character in Avery Keene, and that left room for a sequel, perhaps. It also leaves room for what could be a compelling movie or TV series. And certainly some of her earlier published works have already been optioned for projects. And then just recently there was the announcement of a Discovery documentary that she'll be cooperating with Selena Gomez about women and the songs that have shaped movements.
Phil, let's take it back to Governor Kemp. He won big, so what do we expect in 2023?
Well, I think we're going to have a really good 2023 General Assembly session. We had, I say we, the Republicans had a great session a year ago, and we got a lot of things done that needed to be done. And I do have to laugh, though, a little bit with Melita. It sounds like you're trying to get her a job outside of politics, which would be great. I think she's damaged goods politically, but I do agree with Janelle's analysis, too, that people want to see a record done, and I think the fact that we're a state, for example, that has one of the few that has a AAA bond rating, we're #1 business for 9 years in a row, that's what the Republican record has been, and that affects everybody's wallets and pocketbooks.
All right, well, Theron, then came Georgia's U.S. Senate race that went into a runoff. It was a close runoff on election night, but voters sent Senator Raphael Warnock back to Washington over political newcomer and football star Herschel Walker. Do you think this solidified Georgia as a purple state? Because we saw every Republican get elected statewide on election night.
Yes, and I want to say that Georgia's a blue state. I know Janelle and Phil would disagree.
Wrong.
But no, it definitely solidified us as a battleground purple state going forward. We've learned as Democrats how to win federal races. Clearly, we've got to learn how to win state races. And now when I say state races, not just our constitutional offices, but also our state house and state senate races. We did have some bright spots. We picked up seats in the House and we picked up seats in the Senate. And so ultimately, look, Senator Warnock winning that race was a big, big victory, not only for Democrats, but I think for Georgia. Now we have a senator who's going back to Washington. I think he's going to have a good 6 years.
Janelle, your husband lost to Herschel Walker in the Republican primary, so you might be a little biased here. But could another Republican have beat Senator Warnock?
Well, first, I'm happy you said it like that, because I think there's always this assumption that because Kelvin's my husband that we didn't have a strategy around this, or my support for him is not based in strategy. But it absolutely was, because I have over a decade of political experience, and particularly in Georgia, and this is why I do believe that Warnock is 100% beatable. If you go back to 2020, when it comes to Kelly Loeffler's race, if Doug Collins wasn't in that jungle primary or jungle election, and those votes went to Kelly, Kelly would have won, straight out. In the runoff, if it wasn't for the messaging around voting and not voting, and those 200,000 people that set out had voted, Kelly would have won. And then you fast forward to 2022, even with Herschel Walker being such a target of attacks, he still barely lost the runoff by 100,000 votes. So what we saw is that when it comes to Warnock, the way to beat him is to make sure that you can get, number one, get on offense. We always stayed on defense in both of those races. So you got to get on offense. On top of that, you got to have strategy around how you're going to get him off of talking about racial issues and social issues, because that's his fallback when he's running up against someone who's not a minority. And then lastly, you have to define him. He has not been defined at all in these last few races. So I absolutely think a Republican can beat him. That is why I felt like Kelvin could beat him, because Kelvin could do those three things. And so I do think that that is something that we have to focus in on as Republicans going forward, is strategy.
Melita's over there shaking her head.
Well, I don't know that anybody could have beat Senator Reverend Warnock. He is a rising star for the Democratic Party nationally. He is disciplined about staying on message. He really knows how to raise money. He works a crowd well when it comes to events, shaking every hand, looking people in the eye. And he seems very approachable. And he's a skilled orator, not just in the delivery you would expect from a preacher who's no stranger to the pulpit, but also in the substance behind what he has to say, and the fact that he's really worked across the aisle and has some accomplishments to tout.
Phil, what is the takeaway for Republicans after the Herschel Walker defeat?
Well, I think the strategy of Governor Kemp is one that Republicans ought to be looking at for the future in terms of strategy. He waged a center-right campaign, and he did stay focused on messages we're talking about. And Theron, it's not a blue state, because I think, yes, with the Warnock win, slight win, you still have a great opportunity for the Republican Party to move to the center. And I think a lot of that are kitchen table issues, the economy, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago. I think the fact that cultural issues are rearing their head again. I mean, let's just talk about education for a minute. Everyone's interested in education. We don't need all of this gender garbage that's being pushed by the hard left. And so I think these are the issues you'll see in the legislature, too.
Theron?
Yeah, real quick, listen, I'm going to stay on a positive note here. The fact that Senator Warnock won a very tough race, and yes, it was only about 100,000 votes, but you got to remember, Georgia voters look at their governor and their U.S. senator differently, right? Their governor is someone, he or she, maybe one day we'll have a female governor. I believe it will happen. But, you know, the governor is a person that's at home and that really, like, Georgia person they have like more contact with. The nationalization of the federal races in the U.S. Senate, I think, was a benefit to Herschel Walker, because Republicans had one agenda. They wanted to vote against Biden, right? And what we also noticed is that when Governor Kemp came over to try to give Herschel Walker that bump, he gave him a little bump, but it wasn't enough to actually put him over an incumbent. So it's two things that stood out to me, is that incumbency matters, right? Because you see how Stacey Abrams was not able to beat Governor Kemp, and Senator Warnock went back. And then the last thing I want to push about is that, look, he's more than just what Janelle just kind of laid out. I mean, he has showed us the model of a moderate Democrat can win in the state going forward. And that model, I think, will be one that many will emulate.
Janelle wants to weigh in, but I do want to point out, Senator Walker, compare him to the Stacey Abrams campaign, or Senator Warnock, he really did run a center campaign. I mean, he talked about, you know, reaching across the aisle, working with Republicans. So, I mean, there was a strategy there that won for him.
Well, I will say that we heard him say that once or twice, but other than that, most of his talking points was why Walker was not suitable to hold the race and hold the seat. That was his big issue. But I want to make sure I point out that they were in a runoff because about 300,000 people who voted for Governor Kemp didn't vote for either Walker or Warnock. So it's not like he is, this prize person that everyone loves. If that was the case, they would have voted for him. And if he was that moderate, they would have voted for him. So I don't think that's the case. And moderate, not Warnock. I reread his book, and his book is not moderate at all.
But the votes don't lie. I mean, he gave 4 or 5 examples of working across the aisle, bipartisan. And as we go into 2023, I think you're going to see a more modernization from both of our U.S. senators. I mean, we've been talking a lot about Senator Warnock, but Senator Ossoff has basically been able to work across the aisle to get things done for Georgia. So I think ultimately, look, we can debate all day the different in them from a party standpoint, but I think Georgia voters, Republicans, Democrat, rural, urban, I've got 2 U.S. senators that are delivering for them in Washington right now.
All right, we'll leave it there. Coming up, a landmark ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court on Roe v. Wade that led to major changes on abortions in Georgia.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
Once the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals allowed Georgia to begin enforcing its law, which bans abortions around 6 weeks of pregnancy. Then, a Fulton County judge ruled Georgia's law unconstitutional. Melita, where are we now and where are we headed?
Well, the stay issued by Judge Robert McBurney was then overturned by the Georgia Supreme Court, which allowed the law to take place yet again without ruling on the validity of Judge McBurney's opinion. So the abortion ban for the approximately 6-week period, which was passed in 2019, is now in effect. The next step is a Georgia Supreme Court oral arguments for the case, which are expected in March, but no exact day has been set. This has an impact on what to expect from the General Assembly, because if they stay on target for their adjournment before the Masters Golf Tournament the first week of April, there's not likely going to be a final Georgia Supreme Court ruling on the challenge to Georgia's law, and therefore the substance of Judge McBurney's court order. And typically, the legislature has not changed laws which are under court review. So it's still a lot of flux, but studies that have just been released show that there are a lot of impacts on this abortion thing, like students deciding on which colleges to go to based on whether or not you can get an abortion in that state.
Janelle, do you think we'll see any movement under the Gold Dome on this issue?
I mean, I certainly hope so, but I do agree that I don't know if they're going to be able to do much while it's tied up in the courts. But I just want people to kind of put their selfish perspectives to the side and think about this from a holistic perspective, which, I mean, when I say that, I mean thinking about the number of babies that will be saved because of this, thinking about the number of support centers that are going to pop up and are going to be around to support moms and women in this during this journey, and as well as the number of women that's going to be able to fight or overcome some of the emotional pain and those that will be prevented from it. So I really want to focus in on that. I hope to see this stay in place and that we can, move forward with a pro-life state.
Another big issue this past year, I want to stay under the Gold Dome and talk about the mental health bill that became law, pushed by the late House Speaker David Ralston. Theron, this was really important for him to get through and one of his last major pieces of legislation.
It was monumental, and we all talked about how this was a needed piece of legislation that really dealt with a core issue that I think we all agree on that folks need to deal with, and that's the issue around mental health. And not just talking about it, but actually making sure that the state went further than it already was going to make sure that the funding was there. And so, I think the best way that we can honor Speaker Ralston's legacy is that when the session starts back next week, is to make sure that there's any sort of loopholes in there, anything that we need to do with the funding, everyone coming together to make sure that this Mental Health Parity Act is carried through. And I know that's what his wife is running for his old seat. that she wants to make sure that she continues to, if she's elected, because she's got a race to run, to be a voice for reason and voice and a champion for mental illness in the legislature.
Phil, there is a changing of the guard under the Gold Dome. You have a new House Speaker in John Burns, and you also have a new Lieutenant Governor. How do you think all these Republicans will get along?
I think they're going to get along just fine. In fact, some of their priorities have already been laid out for the session that's starting in January. I think you'll see, again, economic focus, as I've been talking about earlier. I think you'll see, let's just take one quick example of tax credits, which I would think people would want to look at. Some are good, a lot of them are not so good. Remember, we have to look at the return to the taxpayer on some of these tax credits. John Burns has been majority leader for quite a while. He's a veteran. He'll do fine as the new speaker. And Burt Jones has been in the state Senate for a number of terms. He won without a runoff, and I think that they've already had a lot of discussions on some of their priorities. It is a Republican-controlled General Assembly, so I think they're going to be fine.
Melita, I've covered politics for a long time, and I saw a lot of fights among the Republicans and the different egos and the different factions there. What do you anticipate in 2023?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of a very interesting debate. And the other thing, in addition to the leadership changes at the top, you also have from both sides of the aisle the largest ever freshman class of legislators. So you have a lot of people who are going to be learning the ropes come January.
One person I do want to mention, and that's the Economic Development Commissioner, Pat Wilson, because he's had quite a year in 2022 with a lot of major announcements. Phil, we've had Hyundai, we've had Rivian, we've had a lot of major, I mean, we're talking thousands and thousands of jobs coming to Georgia.
SK.
Well, that's right. You've listed, you could list far more. He was first appointed by Governor Nathan Deal, and I think he's had about a 9-year run. And I think there's so much going on. You know, he's also promoting tourism. He's doing foreign trade trips. He and his team are just amazing. I've made him the winner, as some others of us have too. And so I think you're going to see him continue with heavy recruiting.
Theron.
I want to say this about Commissioner Wilson, and everything Phil said was actually correct. I'm agreeing with you, starting the year off right. But everything Phil said is right. I mean, we named those big corporations, but one of the things that Commissioner Wilson, he has a great team. There's too many folks to name, but the collaboration with the Metro sort of economic development agencies like Invest Atlanta, and then down in Savannah, where I know Burt Brantley is leaving the governor's office to go down there and run that entity. And so Pat Wilson has really focused on, okay, we're the Georgia economic development arm of this state, but we want to partner with the regions in North Georgia, in South Georgia, in metro area. And so I think that's been a welcome breath of fresh air from this commissioner, who I think is doing a good job.
And Janelle, he's brought a lot of jobs also to rural Georgia.
Yeah, and I think that's super important, especially when you look at what's happening. And when you look at what happened in 2020, I think that is the thing that was big to me. Governor Kemp, he ran on being able to keep the state open and being able to have a strong economic system. And then you can't do that without a strong team behind you. And so I look forward to that. I'm grateful that they are focusing in on rural America as well, rural Georgia in particular, because we got to make sure that people that live there have jobs to come back to, so that they're not moving out, especially when you see the overcrowdedness in Metro Atlanta.
All right, up next, the city of Atlanta got a new mayor in Andre Dickens, but the same crime problems continue to plague the capital city.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Mayor Andre Dickens brought a fresh energy when he took his oath of office almost 1 year ago. Phil, you said you would give him time, but it's been another violent year. Atlanta has broken the homicide record for the 3rd year in a row. The mayor selected a new police chief. Your take on how it's all shaping up?
I think we need to give him a little more time. As I said last week, I like the appointment of Darren Shearbaum as the new police chief. Let's remember and put it in perspective. Sadly, the former mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, ruined the city of Atlanta, and particularly the Atlanta Police Department. They still have to, thanks to her, they still have to do retention and recruitment. It could take another year or two while we're up to strength. That's the problem. Our response times are lousy. We could go on and on. The courts have to get tougher, and I think that no cash, no bail is wrong. The city council ought to repeal that because there's too many repeat offenders out there on the street.
Theron.
I would say this, I spent a lot of time talking to the mayor all throughout the year, and whether it was affordable housing, dealing with the issue of homelessness, infrastructure, he's had some big wins. I mean, you look at the things that he's been able to do. We stopped the Buckhead City movement, but public safety has been the preeminent issue throughout his first year. So now going into this new year in 2023, you look at what he's done about dealing with the issue of crime. We can't have a conversation without talking about funding. And so there's no more important budget item in this new budget than putting more money to not only give cops the money they deserve, but make sure that we're investing in the technology, cameras, and everything. Because what we've seen is that the rest are up. They're arresting people, right? But as Phil said, they arrest them, they go to the courts, and then they're let back out. But I think also I will call on the community to continue to do what we should be doing to try to protect ourselves. We now got to know that you cannot be as sort of lax and when you're out and about. Even myself, I'm a little bit more aware of my surroundings now. But yes, the randomization of these crimes that happened in 2022, particularly at the end of the year, definitely really shook the city in a way that we've never seen. But I have the utmost faith in the chief. I think that city council members are holding this administration accountable. The administration is welcoming that input. So ultimately, hopefully when we sit here a year from now, that we will see that the crime has actually gone down, particularly with homicides.
And we see Mayor Andre Dickens out. He's out on the streets. He's talking to people. Melita, we saw the issue of a Buckhead City die pretty quickly during the legislative session this past year. Will we see any movements this year given the high number of murders?
I don't think so. The Buckhead City forces they just really don't have concrete plans for how this would be implemented. And the proponents of this movement point to Sandy Springs and Brookhaven as examples of what they want, without mentioning that those two cities were created from unincorporated territory. What they're trying to do, carving a city from existing and long established boundaries, has never been done, and it would set a horrible precedent, not just in this state, but in other places as well. So I just think that movement kind of resembles the Shakespearean phrase, a tale told by idiots full of sound and fury signifying nothing.
Woo! Janelle.
Yeah, I wouldn't call anybody idiots. But I will say this. I do think that the big issue is whether or not people can vote. People who live in the city, who are paying taxes, can decide whether they want to still be a part of Atlanta. That is the big issue. And so I do think that that's going to get on the ballot. I really do. And the reason why is because Jeff Duncan is out, Burt Jones is in. And Burt Jones has been publicly in support of Buckhead City movement. So I think he's going to push that through. But to be clear, Buckhead City has more than just crime to talk about now. I'm talking to more and more people, particularly women, who are, including myself, who refuse to go into Atlanta unless we absolutely have to because of crime. And so that's going to be an impact economically on these businesses. And when small businesses start really feeling that heat and feeling the loss of that revenue, that's another talking point for Buckhead City. So I think Alpharetta and Roswell and Sandy Springs are great examples.
Well, just a quick footnote. You don't have to like the Buckhead cityhood movement, to Janelle's point, not to, though, have a vote on it. Just last year, there were cityhood proposals. Some were voted down. That's where the debate should be. I would differ with Mayor Andre Dickens of Atlanta, where he says, my main focus is to stop Buckhead cityhood. No, your main focus is public safety and budget and some other things. Now, let the vote be. That's when the debate begins. If it gets through the legislature, let the people have a right to vote up and down.
But earlier last year, what were we talking about on this show, right? And this is why I got to push back. All this investment into Buckhead. I mean, new precinct, new officers, more money. It wasn't until the end of the year when we saw these horrific killings. So let's not act like this mayor has not focused on the entire city with a special emphasis on Buckhead. The problem with the Buckhead movement is that it's just divisive. You're trying to de-annex from a city that's existing, and you're utilizing these unfortunate murders to try to revamp it. And I think that when legislatures come back on the Gold Dome, they're not going to be able to make a compelling place why this company should, this portion of a city should de-annex, because I think the mayor is doing a lot in Buckhead.
So you're not in favor of a vote.
But everything you named was paid for by these people.
I got to leave it there because
they should have a right.
I got to leave time for winners and losers. Sorry, and we never got to the closing of Atlanta Medical Center. But coming up, winners and losers of the year. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
Let's do winners of the year, right? We don't have a lot of time because y'all went long in that last block, but Melita, we'll start with you.
Well, my winners of the year are the team of Senators Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff, because they're quite a pair, whether they're riding in the back of a pink Cadillac in the Pride Parade or they're campaigning side by side. They've worked across the aisle and they make a formidable team and they represent Georgia well.
Phil.
I think all of us on the panel would agree on some of my winners, and we have to go back, and it was January of 2022 when we lost our former host, longtime Georgia Gang.
Our patriarch.
Our patriarch, Dick Williams, and I think we would all agree Vince Dooley, we lost him in 2022, and of course we talked about the late speaker, David Ralston. That was a loss. My big loser is Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis. You know, I made her a winner about a year ago for her,
I remember.
her anti-gang initiatives, but now I've turned on her on one thing, and that is she's lost her focus. It's this witch hunt against Donald Trump. You know, the Justice Department is already investigating. This is just a duplication. It's a waste of time and money.
Yeah, I'll go fast. Listen, definitely the winner of the year has definitely got to be Senator Warnock for this win. I also want to make Stacey Abrams the winner of the year as well. I think that even though she was not successful in running for governor, I think she's definitely done a lot of good for this state. And then lastly, I want to just really make Andre Dickens a winner of the year as well for dealing with the issue of crime. And of course, Speaker Ralston, may he rest in peace, dear friend that we lost too soon.
Your friend.
Yeah.
Janelle.
Okay, my winner of the year is Governor Kemp. I think he showed us all how to do it and how to run a strong campaign. I also want to highlight Bruce Thompson, who won Labor Commissioner. We didn't talk much about him, but his team, Hannah and Lewis, they were on the road every single day. And my loser is Stacey Abrams. And as Melita pointed out, I think she should go and be an author and not a politician.
All right, well, I've got one quick winner to fill in. It's Richard Belcher, who retired after 5 decades in the news business. Congratulations to him. Happy retirement. See you all in the new year.